Hi, I'm Lolly Lewis, and I'm the founder of Amateur Music Network. So, welcome everyone. So glad to see you at our workshop. We are our sort of aesthetic with these workshops is that we're really happy to bring people together for music, even if it's not really together, and even if we can't play music, at least there's sort of a nod in that direction, and it does feel very much like a community. So I'm really, really glad that you're here. I don't want to waste much time, but I do want to mention that this is the first time we've tried a series with this Eventbrite protocol. And what I think is going to happen, and we'll really find out next week, but what I think is going to happen is you'll go back to exactly the same link that you went to tonight, and once I turn it on next week, everybody will be able to come in. If for some reason that doesn't work, and we will test it, but if we find that it doesn't work easily, I'll just send everyone a link and I'll post it on our workshop information page so you'll be able to get in. But I'm just going on faith. That's what Eventbrite tells me is going to work. So let's just all pretend that's going to happen. With that great enthusiastic optimism, I'm going to turn it over to a wonderful mentor, Elizabeth Blumenstock, who apparently everybody knows very well. I first met you, Elizabeth, I think on the Artaria Quartet sessions that we did. This was in the 90s, I guess. Anyway, it was a long time ago. And that is what got me into early music, an interest in early music. So, and I've been really an avid early music listener ever since. We're going to have a great time. Take it away.
Okay, what I'd love to do first is just, since this is a little risky, this format is so, we're doing pretty well. It feels already pretty nice, but I'd love to hear from you for 10 seconds. Just say your name, where you're dialing in from, and if you can say in 5 seconds what got you interested in Baroque music. You could even just say, I've always loved Baroque music. It's as simple as that. I just love to have a little sense of your voice and you and where you are. Lolly, would you sort of ask people?
Yes, we're going to go through the participants. So observers, please just bear with us. And this is not in any kind of order. It's just on my list. So we're going to start with Anne Gui. Anne Gui.
Hi, my name is Anne, and I live in Cupertino, California. I'm a student of Lauren Telly at the Dianza College, and I have always enjoyed early music and have been to many concerts of yours, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Mai Chang.
Hi, I'm May. I'm a violinist freelancer in Los Angeles, and I just purchased a beautiful bow by David Hawthorne. I'm trying to learn how to use it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, Elizabeth Ingber. And I apologize for mispronouncing people's names.
That was right. I'm a pianist, violist, and violinist in San Mateo, and I've just always enjoyed early music. And in the last few years, I've gotten into Scottish fiddling, which has some influence from Baroque. So I look forward to learning about how I can apply those things.
Okay, Carol Braves. I know you're here. I see you checked in.
Is she muted? Muted?
Oh, okay, there we go.
Hi,
Carol
Carol.
Braves, Oakland, California. I'm a violinist and I blame it on Bach.
Okay, Garrett Fishbach. Garrett, are you muted? I know you're here.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry.
Almost.
Hi, sorry.
Lolly, I've done an ask all to unmute, so people, you'll receive a request to unmute, but don't speak until you're called on, okay?
Okay, Garrett, I still can't quite see you.
Camera is not connected, but
that's okay. That's why.
I'm
Hi.
delighted to be here, and I'm excited to learn about, because I love to play Bach on the modern fiddle, and I have no experience playing period instruments at all. And so I'm excited about this. Thank you so much for
We're glad you're here. Sun Young Shin.
Hello. I'm now in Sarasota, Florida. I used to be in Urbana-Champaign studying with Charlotte Maddox and became good friends with Martha Steele. And I met Elizabeth there when she came to give a concert and master class. I've fallen in love with all the things that I've got to be exposed to. So I'm just chugging along, trying to get there, getting to the root of it. Yeah.
Great.
Oh, I'm violin.
Akiko Kobayashi.
Hi. So I was introduced to this workshop by my teacher, Joanne Plana, who I've been studying with for the past year or so. And I've gotten into learning about early music due to some auditions that I was taking and have admired you for a long time. So very happy to see you.
That's sweet. Ken Wolf. Ken, did you ever get your video to work? I know you were here. Well, we're going to move on, Ken, and come back to us if you can figure it out. Lynn Ludicky.
Hi, I'm Lynn Liddicky, and I've been a fan of Elizabeth's from the first time I saw her. I found out about early music about 10 or 11 years ago after being a modern violinist for a very long time. I was told that early music was dead simple. I found that that was entirely wrong, and I have loved the world ever since.
Lovely. Okay, Lugene Eilman, sorry.
No, you're right. It's Lugene. I say it's like Eugene, but with an L.
Yes.
This whole early music is all new to me. I played violin through high school. I also played the French horn, piano. I sang. I kept singing, gave up violin and French horn once I graduated from high school. For some reason, I kept my violin, which used to be my mom's, tucked away under a bed in a spare bedroom. I blame all this on my new boyfriend, new partner, who I've known for about a year and a half, and he has introduced me to the early music world. I've been learning how to play the Renaissance flute and then the Baroque flute, and a few weeks ago pulled my violin out thinking maybe I could start playing that too, and he had gotten an email about this, so that's why I'm here.
Terrific. Okay, Margaret Traylor.
Hi, I'm Margaret from Oakland, California. I've always loved Baroque music since I was little. And being an amateur, I didn't know there was such a thing as Baroque performance technique until I joined the local Baroque orchestra here in the Bay Area.
And Paul Brancato.
Hi, everybody. I've always loved Baroque music, and I've known Elizabeth. Actually, I haven't seen you in 45 years, but I knew Elizabeth, I think, before she was such an expert in Baroque music. So I'm really anxious to see what you have to offer and really looking forward to it.
And Rebecca Peters.
I played violin and viola, and I haven't played gut strings since grade school, which is quite a while ago, so we won't go there. But I'm really curious to see the workshop and learn how to do some of the techniques on using modern instruments. So thank you.
And Rubina Sanders.
Hi, I have a similar story to Margaret and Anne, and I'm actually a student of Lauren's. So I started learning to play the violin maybe about 8 years ago. I really got into early music when I joined Lauren's orchestra, and I love it. Always wanted to get into it, but I never knew how, so it's one of the reasons I'm here. So
It's great. And Sue Johnston.
My name is Suzanne Johnston. I'm from Topeka, Kansas, and my oldest brother specializes in Baroque music, so I just grew up loving it and loving to listen to it.
Anna Sombor.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Anna. I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California. a long time Baroque music lover and subscriber and listener to Philharmonia Baroque. I always admired you guys. And finally, a couple of years ago, actually, I picked up the violin only, but I had some music background, but the violin is relatively new to me, actually. But I'm playing in Lauren's orchestra at the Dienza also. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about the Baroque performance practices and techniques. So can't wait to hear more about it.
Okay, Stephen Grenholm.
Hi, I'm Steven. I live in San Francisco. I long ago did Baroque and then didn't do anything for a very long time. So now I have a renewed appreciation, and I have to say that my abilities, like my gut strings, are fraying constantly, but hey.
We're glad you're here. And Lauren Taylor.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Lolly, Ken just texted me and he's locked out.
Oh my goodness. I don't, thank you for telling me, and let me see if I can figure out why. Go right ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Terley from San Francisco. I play a little bit of everything and wave my arms around. And anyway, I've always loved Baroque music, but I think it was the inaugural season of Philharmonia Baroque that put me over the edge and started my love of period practice, and still loving it. Thank you.
Okay, and hold on, let me get back here. The next is Virginia Smedberg.
Hi all, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Are you unmuting me? Okay, good. So I'm a professional opera player, mainly Opera San Jose, West Bay Opera, missing it for 6 months. When I teach, I tell my students, well, this is a little bit that I think I know about Baroque and early performance practice. And, but you know, it's like I say, there's all kinds of things that were written at the time that I haven't read. And I pick things up when I play with people who seem to know what they're doing. But I said, this is an opportunity to find out what's really supposed to be going on.
Okay, and Yvonne Burklow. Hi,
Yeah.
Yvonne.
Hi. Yeah, I live and I only play violin. I've always been a great fan of Baroque, and I've had the good fortune to hear Philharmonia Baroque with Elizabeth and was smitten by it. So one of my other great loves is international music, but I'm always I'm trained, and so I'm at a loss, and so I just enjoy it and don't play it. But like Balkan and Greek, and that's my great love too. So anyway, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Debbie, did we get you? Oh, you're an observer. Okay, I just saw your name pop up. So that is everybody. I sent a link to Ken, and hopefully he will join us soon. And I think we'll just turn it over to Elizabeth. If you would all mute yourselves, please, and you'll pretty much stay muted throughout, unless we ask you to unmute. Thanks.
I just want to ask, do you all have your instruments nearby by any chance? Yes, most of you? Because in the course of this class, I would like to ask those of you who want to just play a few things. Since you're muted, you'll be the only one who can hear yourself. But that's probably a good thing, because it would be pretty awful to hear all of us probably at A440 and A444 and A415 and gosh knows what else trying to play together. So that's not going to happen. Okay, let's just jump right in. What the topic for today basically is how do you make Baroque music expressive? What are the techniques you use to be expressive when you play this repertoire? And inevitably, since most of us are pretty good at playing or pretty good at assessing the expressiveness of players we hear, we have an idea what expressive playing consists of now. And it turns out that they're not quite the same approaches to expression, what we do now and what people probably did then. So just if I were to ask you to say, don't, but I will ask, hypothetically, if I were to ask you to say, what is one of the standout features of modern string expression, you'd probably say vibrato, right? Vibrato is a big part of an expressive tone. It makes a tone shimmering and appealing, helps project sound. It's a wonderful thing, vibrato. It's really great. But it turns out that in the earlier times, people didn't regard it as a consistent part of tone production or a necessary component of tone, right? It was considered probably something a little bit more like an ornament. If you had a particularly hot note, a note, say, that was long and that suspended over a bar line and became a dissonant note, that note would become more and more beautiful as you played through it. So you might employ just a little extra wiggle when it got really hot, when that note got hot, right? So that's vibrato as a sort of like icing on a cake, not as a consistent thing, right? So it's not like they didn't use vibrato. They certainly did. In fact, by probably the 1730s, one of the great, obscurely great and difficultly great Baroque composers, Francesco Gemignani, said, use vibrato as often as possible. Ooh, that's kind of not what we think of when we think of Baroque music. We tend to think of these more plain kind of Renaissance style bow strokes, you know, a little more circumscribed, a little less passionate perhaps. So it's kind of odd to have a composer say that. In any case, I'm not going to go into his thing because I do, just to say, just one little aside, I don't think he meant what we might mean by that, because we, in the modern time, have taken the idea of using vibrato as often as possible right up to the max. We've pretty much maxed it out. I mean, there are people who can just vibrato right through whatever note they're playing, however fast they're going. There's some little shadow of vibrato going in there, right? This is an integral part of many people's tone production. Not everybody does it that way, but it's certainly very common. I don't think that Gemignani would have supported, for example, if you had offbeat eighth notes going pa, pa, I don't think he would have thought that that was a great place to use vibrato. So I think he probably would have meant something different by using vibrato as often as possible. The more important issue here is that if you take vibrato out of circulation for the most part, except for expressive moments, what have you got left? Where is expression going to come from if it's not going to come from the left hand? This is not a rhetorical question. Well, it is sort of, but the answer, of course, is your bow. And in fact, yes, the bow is your primary expressive tool in Baroque style. And your bow is, as a Baroque bow, is quite differently constructed, has different physical properties, different behaviors at the frog, in the middle, and at the tip from a modern bow. And we'll talk about that shortly. So this concept that the bow is the expressive partner of the two hands, of two arms, is actually something you can meditate on as you ponder your Baroque future, because I think most of us have a kind of a left-handedness in our minds when we play our violins and violas. We're kind of focused on that left hand. It seems like the business. It seems like the bomb. It seems like the thing you got to focus on. And so the first thing you want to think about is your left hand. All it really needs to do is the fingers need to be in the right place at the right time, as calmly and relaxedly as possible. So there's not that energy invested in being expressive in the left hand for the most part. That means that in addition to letting go of the burden of control that modern playing puts on the left hand, you shift that over to the right. Start thinking of your bow arm as really where the music resides, because to a large extent that's true. Of course, you got to have good intonation. Of course you do, and all that stuff, and the occasional vibrato. But really, this is where expression begins and ends in Baroque style. I'm going to read you a quote from Giuseppe Tartini from a letter he wrote to a wonderful young violinist who was also a quite good composer. Her name is Maria Lombardini. And this is what Tartini, who was acknowledged to be one of the great virtuosi of the late Baroque, this is what he had to say about the bow. Your main study should be the use of the bow in order to make yourself mistress in the expression of whatever can be played or sung. First, exercise yourself in a messa di voce, I'll come back to that, upon an open string, for example, upon the second, which is the D string. Begin pianissimo and increase the tone by slow degrees to fortissimo, and this should equally be done on the down bow and the up bow. Set out on this exercise at once and spend at least an hour on it every day, though at different times, a little in the morning, a little in the evening, and keep constantly in mind that this is, of all exercises, the most difficult and the most important. When you master this exercise, every degree of pressure upon the string will become easy and certain, and you will be able to execute with your bow whatever you please. I think it's really telling that when she writes to him saying, tell me how to improve my violin playing, he doesn't talk about shifting, he doesn't talk about vibrato, he doesn't talk about intonation, he doesn't talk about the left hand at all. He spends most of his letter talking to her about how to use the bow. This kind of points us into the understanding that the bow really is the sine qua non of expressive playing at this time. Now, if we take a look at long tones with no dynamic change and with vibrato and with vibrato, with long tones making a swell, you're going to see some things. I'm going to try to play. This is kind of awful on Zoom. I'm going to go to, I know Zoom has an option that helps a little. It's called, in your more section, it says enable original sound. So just remember that when you have to play something on Zoom, because it tends not to sound too great. Because I'm going to give you first an example of just a long tone. This is my almost modern bow. It's not quite a modern bow because I don't own a modern bow, but it's like one generation. It's the Father Tourt. It's a copy of a bow by Francois Tourt's father, who was also a bow maker. So here is just a straightforward kind of modern tone. It's just a long tone with a little vibrato, right? Okay, so that's not the kind of thing that I just described by reading Tartini's letter. Here's more like the kind of thing that Tartini was asking for. You can hear that there's this pianissimo beginning, a swell to some degree of forte in the middle, and then a dying away. So if you have your instruments handy, I'd like to just do a couple of each of these, okay? I don't care what note you play, since I can't hear you. So just pick a note that you like, any note will do, and just basically notice with your modern bow that your tendency is for the bow to lie down on the string and produce an even sound, and the vibrato is an even and steady accompaniment to that steady sound. Let's just go ahead and play a long bow stroke. Here we go. Okay, so we've done a couple of those. If you pick up, if you have, I'm going to just use my so-called and some of you have Baroque bows and some of you don't. I'm going to use my so-called almost modern bow, and I'm going to choke up on it. It makes it behave a little bit more like a Baroque bow. We'll talk about that later too. And so this time, when you enter the string, try entering from above. Don't start on the string, right? Enter from above the string. And then put some pressure, right, with your, pronate with your finger, push down with your forefinger to increase the sound in the middle of the bow stroke, and then taper to the tip. Okay, just give that a try on a down bow. And I recommend using an open string so you're not tempted to vibrate. So you can see that those are really rather different approaches to drawing a sound out of the violin. Yeah. With the vibrato, you have a little more opulence of tone, right? And a little less activity on a dynamic level. With the Baroque bow, you have a little plainer sound, but a little more sense of action or development because of the dynamic change, right? And I'm going to just suggest that you imagine yourself playing with a lot of this, kind of wavy arm where your bow comes off the string, right? And a lot of this in and out of the string quality. You might lift off the string altogether in a beautifully tapered, suave way. You might re-enter the string very gently, but with a sense of dipping down into the string to create shapes, dynamic shapes. If you imagine yourself playing that way, as opposed to this kind of more bravura, more extrovert kind of thing, this has got a kind of conversational, kind of almost poetic kind of approach to the string. The string is your voice, the bow is your breath. You breathe with the bow and you speak. And the next class is going to be on the subject of rhetoric, musical rhetoric. And so this concept of speaking with the bow becomes very important. Baroque music is explicitly rhetorical music, and I'll talk about later, in the next class, exactly what that means. So you could probably tell from that little exercise, if you hadn't known already, that modern bows, they tend to make an even sound and they tend to like staying on the string. Baroque bows, by contrast, can promote a variable tone dynamically, and because they're lighter and they taper away to the tip, which is not heavy, they're easier to lift, right? So these things, we'll discuss these differences again, a little bit more detail shortly. I'm going to give you a couple more quotes as we work our way into this. I think the difference in approach to these two bows can be shown I'm going to read you these two quotes. One from Wolfart, sometime in the mid-19th century. I don't know if you ever used Wolfart studies when you were studying as a child. I sure did. That was my teacher's favorite go-to for learning good bow technique. And then another quote from Leopold Mozart, who, despite the fact of his last name, was a Baroque gentleman. Don't get confused and think he was some classical guy, because he was Mozart's father and therefore was born in the Baroque era. Okay, here's the quote from Wolfart. Bowing symmetry, no matter what the left hand is required to do, instills stability and uniformity of sound. And that is true. That is a genuine truth. And I can remember endlessly being taught whole note, whole bow, half note, half bow, quarter note, quarter of a bow, so that the amount of pressure was equalized, vis-a-vis the duration of the note, producing a uniform sound and dynamic, right? And that was a goal. That was a goal, and it remains a goal of good violin playing. And I'm not sitting in judgment on that, because I've heard too many great performances by people trained that way, and it's a fantastic thing. It's just a different thing from what was done earlier. Here's the quote from Leopold Mozart. Begin the downstroke or upstroke with a pleasant softness. Increase the tone by means of an imperceptible increase of pressure. Let the greatest volume of tone occur in the middle of the bow, after which moderate it by degrees by relaxing the pressure of the bow until, at the end of the bow, the tone dies completely away. And you'll see this is really pretty much another way of saying what Tartini said to Maria Lombardini, just talking about starting pianissimo or gently with a pleasant softness. Same thing, reaching a fuller dynamic in the middle of the bow and then tapering away. At this point, some of you might be thinking, oh no, do I have to have a Baroque bow to play this repertoire? And the answer is no, you do not. You do not. I mean, depending on your passion for a bygone time, for a time that you could possibly recreate by having that equipment, you might want to go there. You might want to get yourself a fabulous bow by David Hawthorne from Cambridge, like Lynn Ludick's, which I'm very jealous, Lynn. I tried to get on his waiting list. It was like a 5-year waiting list, and I thought, oh my God, never mind. I'm going to be dead before I get one. So that didn't happen. But for those of you who are using modern bows, I would like to point out that if you choke up on your modern bow, like 3 to 4 inches. If you have wrapping above the frog, you could actually put your thumb at the end of the wrapping. That'll take you up about 3.5 inches from the frog. This functionally shortens the bow, of course, because you're not going to play behind your hand, right? You're not going to be using the entire length of the bow. It's a very simple way of shifting the weight and balance of the bow in a somewhat more Baroque direction. And you can start to get access to some of the inflections and behaviors of a Baroque bow, even with a modern bow, if you just choke up on it. That's a completely acceptable messa di voce. That's the name for that swelling sound, right? And it's actually just a little bit easier. You functionally lighten the bow as well when you choke up on it like this, and it makes it easier to lift it off the string. So let's do a little exercise. I see you've all got your instruments up, or nearly all. And so basically what you can do is thinking about using a rounded bow stroke in your arm that you can see my elbow. I'm actually describing a circle with my entire arm. You can see a circle in my elbow. My shoulder is not lifting so much, but it's quite unlocked. And then you just come into the string with that pleasing softness. It may feel a little odd. Choking up on the bow really does help. Just move your hand up. It won't slip out of your grip, I promise. And just try, as you come in, just imagine, not just that you're going to hit the string and then flatten out like a tire with a sudden flat tire, but you're going to continue pushing down into this string after you touch it. So coming from the air, drawing a circle, the circle continues down into the string. You just have a sound that has a shape, right? As opposed to a sound that is like this. We're going to do these exercises. Oh my gosh, is it really 8:36? Oh, God, I can't stand it. There's never enough time. Okay, I'm gonna give a short little talk on the 18th century soundscape, the sound world in the 18th century. What did it consist of, right, compared to now? Think about what people would have heard. They would have heard people.
Elizabeth, it's not 8:36, it's 7:36.
Elizabeth is in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But it's still later than I thought, as usual. Okay, so in the bygone days, before the fruition of the Industrial Revolution and its current day consequences, people heard each other. They heard animals. They heard all the sounds of nature, like waves and wind and thunder and lightning and all of those things. They heard the clopping of horses' hooves. They heard, you can think of all the things they heard. One thing they probably did not hear, in fact, they certainly did not hear, is a sound that went like this, which we are treated to on a virtually daily basis. Electronic sounds that have no inflection whatsoever, right? This is a fairly recent addition to the things that we listen to. And it's not entirely a pleasant one. Most of us find those beep kind of noises, we call them noises. We don't call them sound. We certainly don't call them music or natural. They are unnatural. Natural sounds usually have some kind of a shape. They thunder, right? And then it goes away. Waves have a cyclical wave-like quality. What a surprise. People's voices, the inflections of people's voices, all of these things are very natural and shapely. So it's not surprising that music has got some of this too. This is a kind of language. And it's just, I find it kind of interesting that we are hearing sounds that people then did not hear. Going back to this, what we just did with the bow, I've talked about being up in the air and lifting your arm and coming in gently to the string. This is essentially another thing that you want to think about, besides letting go of your left hand so much and focusing more on your right. Focusing more on your right with a three-dimensional attitude, that you're actually lifting your bow and re-entering the string, right? Rather than starting from the string and being in functionally almost just two dimensions, right? You're really going for three-dimensionality. Think of it this way. If you start on the string, right? If you start a tone from the string, you are already essentially in the string. And it becomes much more difficult to make a shape because you have erased the whole spectrum of movement from no sound at all through gentle sound as you touch the string to deeper sound as you develop the tone, right? So that's part of the idea. The whole idea of a messa di voce, a swell in the sound, comes from this idea that you start from silence and develop the sound through the nature of your contact with the string. Gentle at first and getting stronger, right? So that's why this three-dimensional sort of fluent lifting quality in your bow is really foundational and really important. Okay, so one thing you can also do as you start practicing this bow stroke, remember we're going to do these bow strokes and a few more every time we meet. Think about feathering your way into the string. Think about trying to make a sound when you first make contact with the string that sounds like a soft consonant, like v or s or w. That there's just no k or t, no plosives, no p, no ictus, no initiation. Because once you get that, you're in the string and it's harder to develop and make the sound flexible dynamically. So think about entering the string with as much gentleness, and it's helpful at this point to be thinking of v or sh. So one of these soft sounds at the initiation of your tone. This will really help. Yeah. It's kind of interesting just to say as a historical point that well into the 1800s, after the Tort model bows were available, there were many teachers, particularly in Germany, who still recommended that people choke up on those bows, despite the increasing habit of holding them right down, way down at the frog for more power. This is actually an interesting thing. I don't think it's just an example of people being set in their ways. It is partly that, of course. The old ways are better, right? Why should I do it different from the way my father did it, right? This is how you do it. That kind of thing. That is yeah, that's a thing. But I don't think that's the only reason people might have been inclined to choke up on the bow. I think that the music at that point was undergoing radical changes, right? Becoming more melodic, more cantabile. There was a reason these bows appeared, this Tort model, which was the succession at the end point, essentially, of a lot of experimentation in the previous 50 years. There was a reason bow makers were experimenting. Music was changing. The nature of the style of the music was changing, and the bows changed along with it because the direction in which it was changing meant that the bow that emerged was the thing that did that kind of music better, right? So that's just cultural evolution at work. I'm going to talk very briefly about the differences between the modern and the Baroque bow, because it's fascinating and it is informative if you should pick up a Baroque bow. So here is my almost Baroque bow. It looks pretty familiar. It's got the hatchet tip. It's got the little downward curve in the middle. It's got a kind of a nice little frog. When you pronate, when you push down, where you put your hand, put some pressure on the bow, push the stick down toward the hair, you notice that the bow is curved in the direction of your pressure, right? So it's as if the bow on a physical level is saying, yeah, give it to me. I can take it. Give it to me, right? The pressure just shoots down along the bow. And then the bow, so here's this energy from your pressure shooting easily down along the bow, and then the bow starts to curve uphill. Well, the energy doesn't go quite as easily uphill as it did downhill in the middle of the bow. And the result is that somewhere the energy you put in here kind of pools somewhere between the middle of the bow and the last 5 inches or so, where there is a more pronounced up curve, right? This is probably the reason why most modern playing gets done between about 8 inches above the hand and 4 inches from the tip. That is a great place to play. The sound has pooled there. It's like a giant resource for power and clarity. It's also ergonomically great. You're not hyperextended playing at the tip, and you're not stuck at the frog with the heavy tip flopping around in the abyss over your left shoulder, right? So it's ergonomically great, and that's where the sound is. Now let's take a Baroque bow, by contrast. What you see here is a very different situation. When you push down here, this bow, which is ever so gently curved up, many Baroque bows are either straight or up curved. If they're down curved, they're later than the Baroque period for the most part. They're not actually Baroque bows. But when you press down on a Baroque bow, that bow, physically, the physics of this bow does not accept your pressure and send it anywhere because it's curved the wrong way. It's kind of fighting against your pressure. So what happens when you press on a Baroque bow, you get what we would call an inflection. You get an immediate response of strength right where you press, but not carried on. It's not sent down the bow much, not so much. And this is a very interesting thing, because in as much as the modern bow is designed to make an even sound, it is beautifully designed for that, and it suits music that demands an even tone. Likewise, the Baroque bow, with its tendency to make inflections and not so much to sing evenly, right? It is speaking. So you could say the modern bow is singing, while the Baroque bow is making inflections and accents and speaking to you, saying important things with inflection, right? We'll talk, as I say, we'll talk about rhetoric before long. So we're getting close to a discussion of rhetoric, in fact. So I just to recap kind of what we've talked about, which may not seem like much, but it's almost everything. Left hand, not so important. Right arm, three-dimensional, graceful, dynamically shapely. I'm not saying that modern bows are not graceful. They are, just different. Looking for that dynamic contour and variability always. And we'll find out more through rhetoric how to do that. I'm going to tell you another quote from one of my favorite figures from the Baroque. His name was Quantz, Johann Quantz. He worked for King Frederick the Great at the court in Potsdam. He was a very fine flute player, and King Frederick the Great was a pretty good flute player and a terrible, terrible boss, a terrible control freak, and a tortured soul in many ways. Won't go into great detail about him because we don't have time. But Quantz said a very useful thing. He said, every note must have its piano and forte as time permits. So what he's telling you is that if you have a note of a reasonable duration, you are supposed to shape it dynamically, and that is bow. So this is all these people, they're all addressing this same element of bow being primary in expression, right? He also has a little corollary to that, what he said, which has to do with when you don't have enough time to make a piano and a forte on a note. He says, in that case, I'm paraphrasing, you need to find the group of notes which your shorter note belongs to, find the notes that belong together, and give that whole group of notes a shape. So I'm going to play just one little quick example. I'll just play a few bars of the opening of the Bach double violin concerto. Okay, so that's a sort of quasi-modern. I haven't played modern violin for a long time, so forgive me if it sounds worse than it should. So you'll see that there I have no, there's not much shape there. Those notes are, and the eighth notes are all pretty even in good Wolfart style. There, the long note, the vibrato kicks in, right? So I've achieved some degree of uniformity and symmetry of tone, which is kind of what Wolfart was heading for. That's not how it probably would have gone back then. For example, to apply a Quantz's quote about when you don't have enough time on a note, you find the appropriate group of notes. I think the appropriate group here is pretty clear. So it's a lot more dynamic contour produced by the bow, right? Now I have to say, I always worry when I talk about this that I'm giving modern playing of Baroque music a bad name. I think to some degree, modern players did that themselves. Back in the 50s, there was a lot of, people dismissed Vivaldi as sewing machine music. Stravinsky dismissed Vivaldi, saying he didn't write 500 concertos, he wrote one concerto 500 times, this kind of thing. Very, really kind of dismissive. And it's very unfortunate. So I also have to say that I think that we are finally in a time, I'm very grateful for this, we're finally in a time where there is some rapprochement between a modern approach and a Baroque approach. I think that happy ears listening to happy music can hear liveliness and love in performance, and they gravitate to it. And thank goodness for that. So that's a fantastic thing. Let's see, I've got to check and see, since I'm obviously incompetent with time. 10 minutes, I've got 10 minutes. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're going to talk now for about 2 minutes about rhetoric, because I want to introduce that topic, which is a fabulous topic, and I can't wait for the next class. Basically, Baroque music is deliberately, explicitly founded on rhetorical principles. We know rhetoric was the art of persuasive public speaking. It reached a high point in classical Rome, and indeed, the principles of good public speaking that were developed by Roman orators and philosophers are precisely what informed composers when they decided they needed to make music more rhetorical, which happened in the late 1500s and the early 1600s. Just as in a speech, when you have a speech writer, which may or may not be the person who's delivering the speech. There's a lot of technique involved in writing a good speech, right? That's what I would call compositional rhetoric in terms of music. It's a lot of technique involved in writing a good piece of music, right? We'll talk about composed rhetoric, compositional rhetoric, next class. The other thing we're going to finish up today is talking about what amounts to performance rhetoric, or the delivery of the speech, which is the same as the performance of the piece of music, right? Performed rhetoric is like the art of inflecting the music as if it were speech. You devote more dynamic and articulation to important elements in your words, in your musical figures and the equivalent of words, and less to the unimportant, all in the context of creating a sentence-like phrase. This is a rather poetic view of Baroque music. It's a little bit like reading poetry. If you were to say, oh, I can't think of a great poem in English, but you can imagine, just imagine a poem delivered without inflection, without phrasing, how uninteresting that would be. And then imagine it delivered with an eloquent voice, with beautiful phrasing, with stresses on beautiful and important words, and just gliding through the less important words. How much more meaningful that is. To take a modern day example, just think of the bad computer voices that we've all been treated to on phone menus, right? We listen to those voices and they're so aggravating. They're aggravating because they don't inflect properly. They're either neutral and uninflected, or they inflect like Jim Kirk on Star Trek, and the wrong syllables and the wrong words are getting stressed, which is fun if you're watching Star Trek and really irritating if you're on the phone menu. It goes to show how important proper inflection really is to comprehensibility and meaningfulness. I like to say that the reason you want to be rhetorical in your approach isn't just because that's the way they planned it, but it's because by doing that, by following the patterns of speech and the phrase structures of speech, which Baroque music very much does, if you do that in performance, you turn on the brain of the listener, the part of the brain that processes speech. And when you do that, you turn on the part of the brain that processes meaning. So a really good rhetorical performance means something to the listener, right? If you give a more bland, less inflected, less rhetorical performance, you may find yourself, if you're the listener, going, wow, they look so in control. They make it look really easy. Wow, look at the buttons on that dress. Oh, great shoes, right? This is not why we go to concerts, right? We go to concerts to be gobsmacked. We want to be gobsmacked. We want to be taken aback by what somebody is saying and doing, what they mean when they do it, right? So that's the most compelling reason I can think of to play in a rhetorical manner. Okay, I have 3 minutes or something to introduce. 5 minutes, awesome. These you might want to either write down a little reminder, because I would like you to practice them at least once between now and next Tuesday. I'm going to give you what I would call 4 foundational bowings. I call them that, and you'll see why. I'll do them again on my modern, my so-called modern, my nearly modern bow. The first one is pretty much familiar, like what you did before, except we're just going to do just a lower half, gentle start, rounded arm, dipping deep into the string. This is bowing number 1. I'm going to give you 4 of these, and then I'm going to apply them in a couple of pieces of music so you can see that they are meaningful. Okay, so that's the first one. If you want to grab your bows, I think we have time to do a couple of those. Grab your fiddle. And you're listening for a gentle start, not a, don't grab the string. Use your gesture to help you in. It's kind of like you're landing like an airplane on the string rather than a helicopter, right? You got a little sort of a good landing. I mean, I've been in plenty of bad landings that they're more like helicopters, but we're looking for it should feel nice too. The role of pleasure is deeply underestimated. It should feel good. It should feel really nice. Okay, that's bowing number 1. Okay, here's bowing number 2. The same thing, a little trickier. Lower half, gentle start, press down into the string so you make a dynamic shape. Same lifted arm, but in reverse, right? This is a little harder. If you reach too far to the tip, it's really hard to control your landing. Right, it kind of flops down there, so therefore only use the lower half of the you just creep in and try not to toss the bow this way. That's kind of the 2-dimensional impulse. Follow through like a golf swing right in those 3 dimensions, and don't move your bow too fast. So you have time to develop the sound, right? All right, so just as a quick application of that, if you're playing the E major Bach concerto, there they are. Bowings number 1 and 2. Bowing number 1, bowing number 2, bowing number 3, number 1 again. This is a far cry from, right? It's a different thing. It's a different thing. Okay, the third bowing gets exciting. The third and fourth bowings are the cooler bowings. Those are just the beginnings. Third and fourth involve 2 bow strokes, but you're trying in 2 bow strokes to make the sound of 1 bow stroke. So it goes like this. Here you go. What I'm trying to do here is come in very gently, immediately crescendo on that short little up bow, and then lurch into the down bow as smoothly as possible. So the profile of those 2 bow strokes is a lot like the profile of the single down bow. Wah wah, wah wah, right? This is not so simple. What you're trying to avoid is, right, a kind of a definite sounding up bow, 2 things, trying to blend those 2 bow strokes into 1 gesture. Right? And the softer you can come in, the easier it will be. You're really putting pressure immediately. I wish I could hear you all, but I can't. So you're going to have to use your ears to determine whether you're making close to the same shape on wah wah as you are on just plain old down bow wah, right? And the last bow stroke is the opposite. And it is a little tiny, nearly infinitesimally small up bow at the end of a number 1 down bow. So just at the very end, just as you're drifting away from the string, you happen to catch the last little bit of an up bow. Wah, 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 right? Let's try that. You can almost not hear that little. It shouldn't sound like 2 things, right? You're aiming for 1 gesture with as close an approximation of a single messa di voce across those 2 bow strokes as possible. Just release, down into the string and release, right? Now just imagine you could play like that all day long and all the music was all beautifully inflected. It'd be like the difference between an ocean liner on calm seas going straight across the ocean and you in a little motorboat going boom, giddy boom, giddy boom, giddy boom across the little waves and the undulations where you feel them all. It's a very lively style of playing, this Baroque stuff. Now, I'm going to say that these bowings are important because they have analogs in speech, and that's the reason they're useful. If you're trying to play in a speech-like manner, it's important to know some of the patterns of speech. One of them is like bowing number 1, when I go wah, it's like saying hey, or wow, or so, right? There's a certain declarative present quality to that. When you do it on an up bow, it's a little bit more like or and, or like a preposition like for, or to, or in. It's a little more responsive, a little less declarative. When you get to bowing 3, wah wah, it's like the word hello, or as is about to happen, goodbye, or today, right? That's called iambic paba. An iamb is a little unaccented syllable that precedes a strong syllable, and that's what that bowing is. That's an iambic bowing, wah wah, iambic, wah wah, and following speech patterns. And the last bowing, bowing 4, is analogous to the words like music, or cello, or brother. There's any number of words. And this is called trochaic, where the little syllable comes after a strong syllable, and it's not accented. It's just a follow-up. wah-wah. And so that's kind of what you're always looking for. Now, remember Quantz, who says every note should have its forte and piano as time permits. This is how you get there. You find the important things, and the things that are not important fall away or lead towards the strong thing. You're always doing one or another, whether it's just from one note to a second, or like the Bach example, the Bach double example, through a sequence of notes. I mean, it's not impossible with that example to play where the whole thing leads forward all the way to there, or the other way to crescendo. Doesn't really matter. It's more about your sense of what the shape is and that there is a shape. Okay, so we're going to repeat these bowings in every class. So I hope you have a chance to think about them a little and try them in the privacy of your own home and get better at them, because that is this is how it is done. This is more important than any other thing you can do to become communicative, eloquent, speech-like in your playing. Next time we'll talk about composed rhetoric, what the composer has put embedded into the music to make certain effects, very much analogous to a speech writer who's trying to be persuasive in his choice of words and form. Same thing with the composer. We'll talk about that. And that's really fun, because I can't tell you how bizarre, fantastic the world of musical rhetoric is, especially in the hands of the Germans, who took it to unimaginable lengths. It's quite astounding and quite wonderful, and I can't wait to talk about it. The third class, I'm going to introduce you to my 7 imaginary friends, which I hope sounds intriguing. Then at that point, I'm hoping that you will in fact submit a piece that you love, or if you haven't already, or a piece that you're working on and are curious about. And I'm hoping to have time in the second half of the third class and during the final class to address issues that come up when you're playing that specific piece, right? Where we will apply all of these techniques: the limited vibrato, the rounded bow arm, the inflected approach to strong and weak, and most importantly of all, with the help of the 7 imaginary friends, learning to discern what is important and therefore what needs to be inflected, and what is less important and needs to be more released, so that you have a good sense of what to do when you're on your own. Okay? It's been a pleasure. I wish I could actually communicate back and forth with you. That's one of the frustrating things about not that you're not all sitting here in my living room, but it's so great to see your faces. I'm going to scroll over and see a few more faces. Thank you for coming, and I'm looking forward to next week.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This was super fun, and we'll see you next week. I'm going to get in touch with everybody. Mostly people got in pretty smoothly, but there were a few hiccups. So I'll email you the actual Zoom link as a backup. And as I said, next week we'll all just cross our fingers that it works smoothly, but we'll make sure you all get in and get those pieces in, submit your selections to us. So we have time to really have that dialed in. And think that's it. I just love what you said about the rapprochement between the modern advocates and the early music specialists, that it's not 2 separate worlds, it's one world of wonderful meaning in music. Elizabeth, I really appreciate that.
Well, it's been a long time coming. There was a lot of stress and misery in the first 20 years or so of Baroque style, in this country particularly. Not so much in Europe, but there as well. It's been a kind of a tough row to hoe for everybody. It's been tough. So I'm just delighted to hear lively, gestural, modern performances of this repertoire. It really gladdens my heart. I leave the bad old days behind.
Okay, everybody. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And thank you all for coming. See you next week.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.